Hello there and welcome back to The Closet Historian and back to my sewing room, where today we're talking about hats and headpieces and masks and all the weird little things I put together for Sanctus. Now some of these I do have the making of footage for, or at least some footage of, and some of them I do not because I was trying to get things done quickly in order to get everything done in time to be able to wear it for that collection. But seeing as I did make quite a few accessories for this last collection, we better go ahead and dive on in. And yes, that's right, I did make several of these the night before I was meant to film, so I didn't get the process on camera. But first I want to talk about these funny little headbands I made out of wire and vinyl and trim with a few sequins sprinkled on. And these were inspired by 17th century Dutch headdresses like these, which were usually worn with and or as part of caps that were worn over most of the hair along the back of the head. These have a wired edge, usually trimmed in, of course at the time, handmade lace, with the main body probably being a fine transparent linen or silk. But it was pretty hard to find information on the actual historic caps, and I have never seen an actual extant cap like this, so if you know one, please link it to me in the comments below. And this is just millinery wire bent into the desired shape, and then I attached this clear and silver, in this case vinyl, onto that. Unfortunately this vinyl and hot glue did not get along, so I had to hand stitch anything I did with this plasticky vinyl. So I did hand stitch all of this onto the millinery wire using blanket stitch, then sewed on some silvery trim around the edges to cover up anything nasty, and I stitched on silver sequins as I did that just because I felt if I had to sew the edge I might as well slip sequins on as I did it. I didn't have an official way to do this. The silver version was my first crack at this, and then of course I made this black version as well, although the black covered millinery wire that I had in stock at this time was not as stiff as the white, so it doesn't hold its shape quite as well as the first one. But I thought these would do a good job of giving a very almost alien, very strange silhouette that we're not used to seeing in a headband or a hat at this current point in history. Although a silhouette that's much more easily placed within several centuries is this short-crowned, almost bergère, 18th century short-crowned hat, or boater hat as we know them more commonly these days, and this shape of hat was also known as a cartwheel hat in the 1940s and 50s. Now this is essentially just a hat blank from a shop on Etsy called A Pink Swan that I've always really liked as a resource for shopping for millinery flowers, especially vintage millinery flowers, but they also carry a lot of hat forms, and you'll see many of the ones that they carry through this video today. But of course at this point in my experimentation with heat transfer vinyl, I had to experiment and see if any would stick on this hat form. So I have designed a sort of mirrored marble effect decal for this one. I will have the graphic available as always, linked below for you over on Pinterest if you'd like to put this decal on anything. I did spend quite a lot of time designing all these graphics for all the different stuff I do in HTV, so I like to make them available to you in case you want to put them on anything and I'll feel like my time was spent more wisely, if that makes any sense. But I just wanted to go ahead and test and see if this would stick on this cinema base, and luckily this black glossy vinyl does. I can link this vinyl below, but you can see I'm using a hand towel here to really help get into the nooks and crannies of this. Of course, a hat base like this is not perfectly blocked, it's not perfectly smooth, and this straw or paper kind of has a texture to it, and once you press the vinyl enough it will take on that texture, which lends this almost a sparkly look or a very wet look, which I definitely didn't mind for this particular project. But as you can see, the vinyl had no problem sticking to this hat base, and of course the hat bases come in several different colors, and the vinyl comes in probably 100 different colors, so you can really get creative with the combinations and embellish a hat to match any outfit perhaps in your closet, honestly. I know I will be using this method again in the future, although this black on black hat does match most things I would ever want to reach for in my own closet. And I look forward to pairing this with patent leather accessories for 30s, 40s, and 50s inspired outfits in the future. Then we have the various filigree metal chainmail sort of veils that I made. Now, unfortunately, I can't show you exactly how I made these because I didn't film the process. It took several days to finish each of these veils, and I wasn't following a pattern. I was making it up as I went along. Each of these filigree findings for the different veils is a slightly different size, so I didn't follow the same pattern in any way while making these. I just laid out the filigree, laid out the beads I kind of had chosen, laid out lots of jump rings, and got to work putting these together, usually starting with a central circle motif where I arranged 5 or 6, however many of the filigree bits fit together to form a sort of star for the center for the top of the head, and I just worked off of that. My only real tip for making these is to get yourself one of these styrofoam head forms. These are kind of wig forms that you would store wigs or hats on. I picked a few up at Michael's, but I assume costume shops and wig suppliers also carry them, and you can certainly find them online. And although these are usually smaller than the average, I think, actual human head, as long as you make things with a few inches of ease around one of these forms. They should fit on over your head. I was constantly going through trial and error though, trying these on as I put them together to make sure things were still going to fit the way I liked and kind of drape the way I liked in front of my face and almost down onto my shoulders and such. Now, I would make a separate video all about how I made this beret, but it would be probably as short as this one, if not shorter, because this really is just 2 pieces and both of them are a circle. So I think if you can draw a circle, you can make a beret like this. It's no trouble at all. I used cotton sateen from Joann's for mine, of course, to match the dress itself, but of course you could use wool or felt or more traditional materials to make one of these if you would like. The inside diameter I used for mine was a 7-inch diameter circle. That isn't counting the seam allowance along this inside edge though, so don't forget seam allowance. And then the total diameter of my circles here is 14 inches to give me a 13-inch beret once it is all sewn up and finished. Basically, you just cut out 2 of each of these and self-line the hat, or at least that's what I did. You could line it with something else if you wanted to. Endless variety and options here, especially when it comes to putting an HTV design on here like this, of course. And as usual, I will have this graphic linked below for you as well. And just a quick note on these crafty butterflies I used to decorate a couple of hats coming up here, but I also just used them on their own, glued to some little hair clips that I also picked up on Amazon, which is where I found these party decoration butterflies. They're for decorating the wall, basically, I think is what the main use for these is. They're just thin, like very, very thin, mylar kind of plastic butterflies that are obviously laser cut. These do seem to come in several colors and finishes and even patterns, so whatever you're looking for, I think there is a butterfly out there for you. Of course, I primarily use the black in my projects, and one side of them is solid black and the other side has an almost kind of tan or champagne colored, very, very fine outline on it, and I used that to my advantage to contrast the 2 sides to create a bit more depth in some of the hats you'll see coming up. The first of which are these tilted little masks / hats. They're sort of pillbox hats that you can also wear down on the face if you would like to. And these are, again, another little cinema hat base from a pink swan, so you can grab these in many different colors over there. I just attached 2 tiny loops of black satin ribbon to the back of these, and then slip a simple satin ribbon covered headband through those to hold this on either forward, like 90 degrees, to my head over my face as a mask. I thought this one kind of looked like a fencing mask, and then on my head in any tilted direction I wanted, or straight on. I made this one with silvery HTV first, and then I made this second one here with, of course, these very long antennae. And the antennae are actually the spines of ostrich feathers, which you can buy from hat making suppliers, and I will link to a feather supplier that has them below. I did use a bit of the black HTV as a base on this, and I again will have that graphic available for you, even though you can hardly see it on this black on black hat, especially after I covered it in more butterflies. This one does have both butterflies cut out of a actual hide of black patent leather. I did a couple of cicadas and butterflies out of that as a base, and then embellished it further with the laser cut butterfly craft butterflies on top of that as well. And all of the decorations, including the long feather quill spine things here, were actually sewn onto this hat base, but you could easily glue it. I think I could have gone away with gluing this, but I was trying to be couture about it while I was making this one. But once I truly started running out of time down here, I did plug in the glue gun. Although I had forgotten that I couldn't glue anything to the shiny vinyl that I again used as a base for this next butterfly hat, so I had to hand-stitch lace all over the vinyl before I could then glue the butterflies to the lace. So it's half hand-stitched, half glued, this one. And this sort of butterfly hat fascinator topper thing is again built on a cinema hat base, different shape this time, a round little molded hat base from, again, a pink swan, who I am not, this video is not sponsored by, but I do quite like that shop and I've always liked their products, so I have no problem endorsing it, I guess. But this is basically a sort of rounded diamond or sort of a rhombusy oval shape of vinyl, again with the edges wired with millinery wire and then bent into a sort of a taco-y shape and then stitched down onto the little hat base so that it stands up 90 degrees from my head. And again, I just stitched some lace appliques down over that piece of vinyl that I had initially used, forgetting that I couldn't glue butterflies to it, and then I glued dozens of butterflies to it, again using both sides of the butterflies for a contrast between the slightly outlined version and the all black version. Of course, they're all glossy here, and I tried to keep things pretty symmetrical to try and give this a very Philip Tracy for Alexander McQueen inspired look. And then we come to the black lace mask. And you may not have noticed, this actually is coated with dozens and dozens, hundreds of little black rhinestones that are hotfix rhinestones that I put on with like a bedazzler tool, which I can also link below for you if you need to rhinestone anything yourself. But this is again built onto a little cap from, say it with me, a pink swan over on Etsy. So this is just a little teardrop shaped hat base, fascinator base here that I used under this piece of stabilized lace. I'll get into that in just a moment, but I just wanted to point out that there is another piece of millinery wire along the back of this that's blanket stitched down to the lace to, again, help support the shape that I had created and to give me a strong point to stitch this piece of lace down to the little hat base as well. This is a quote-unquote Venetian lace applique. This is actually a collar-shaped applique. The very top of this, in the center, you can see that sort of straighter bit. That's supposed to be the collar around like the top of your neck. And this is basically supposed to be like a large Edwardian or like 1970s does Edwardian collar. But I'll show you how I stiffened this applique and arranged it into the shape I wanted using this red lace applique as an example. This one is a smaller collar and therefore it didn't really work out in the end. But you can see what I've done here is I've taken 2 parts water to 1 part PVA glue, just like I use to make my stiffened silk flowers here on the channel. But I stuck the lace applique in there and make sure it's really saturated and soaked in the watered down PVA glue, and then I can pin it down and arrange it into any shape I want. In this case, I'm using tin foil over one of those head mannequin forms. I've shaped that into a support I think will work for the shape I'm after for this particular hat. This was my first crack at doing this, and I think it would have worked if this applique was the same size as the black one, but because this was a bit smaller size, it just turned out a little bit lackluster. It wasn't quite the effect I was going for, so I was glad that the black applique, when it arrived in the mail from Etsy, was a larger size. And the bigger the applique, of course, the more space you have to work with. But essentially this is like doing paper mache almost, just out of a lace applique instead of strips of paper. I'm arranging it and molding it into the shape I'd like in the end, using additional pieces of foil as needed, and some sewing pins, just pinning this all into the foil, onto the foam, into place. And then I'm just going to pour on some additional glue solution here, just kind of baste this thing in glue so that it has plenty of PVA in there that will dry and set and harden and hold the shape that I want. I left this for a full 48 hours, but if you're in a wetter place than Colorado, it may need even longer than that. So make sure you do this in advance if you're going to be using as much glue and basting it quite as much as I am here. And sadly, this red version did not work out, but here is how I had formed the black applique sitting in its glue formation on top of some foil. This one I did arrange mostly flat, as you can see. I just had a little bit of a hill in my foil for where my face was going to be, so I kind of created a face-shaped oval teardrop out of tinfoil, and then put that down on a flat piece, arranged my applique like so, and let that dry. And after everything has set, you just peel this off the foil, and of course I again added that extra stabilization of the wire in the back, put this onto the little hat base, and then I sat here with my hot fix tool and stuck on a couple hundred black rhinestones to give this a nice bit of sparkle. Of course, the couture version of this would probably have hand sewn like beadwork and sequins, but I was not working on that kind of a time scale for this particular little mask that I was making. Near the end of things, I really did not leave myself enough time to get all these hat projects done, which, like I said, is why I have so little footage of the process. And the final hat that I put together for Sanctus was the gold sun hat. And the idea for this hat was inspired by ancient Egyptian crowns where like a big disc is held above the head, which is usually depicting the sun. And again, we have another round hat base, this time with a little Petersham hat ribbon inside. Not really sure why, it's quite cute though. Again, I stitched on 3 loops this time of black ribbon to the back of this, 2 so that I could slip my headband in here, and 1 more just so that I could pin bobby pins to that little piece of ribbon and help secure this onto my head, because it's not the most stable of things. The large disc for this one is actually supported inside by some of that plastic canvas for needlepoint again. That was a bit of a heavy material to choose for this. I wish I had the stiff buckram that I used to be able to find here at Allen's in Denver, but they haven't carried the kind of hat buckram I like in a little while, so I kind of was just working with whatever was in the studio to make this. I think the lighter in weight you keep the disc, the easier it is to position it how you would like. This is just 2 pieces of fabric cut in a 14-inch circle once again, so it finishes at 13 inches with the seam allowance. And the inside edge of this is wired with a piece of millinery wire as well. I was hoping that was going to offer me enough stability, but I ended up adding a second smaller circle in black felt on the back with another bit of millinery wire around the edge of that as well, just for additional stability. This really is in many ways a wearable mock-up. I didn't know how to make this. I was just winging it, which is another reason I don't feel comfortable making tutorials on any of these things because I was really slapdashing it all together. Now for the feathers on the front of this, again we have a few of those ostrich feather spines and then some other black feathers that I can link below for you. But I really just laid these out next to me and sort of delicately arranged them how it seemed best. I didn't have a plan or rhyme or reason again here, and to reference my favorite milliner, Philip Tracy again, he calls these sort of feather arrangements a feather salad. So I was just kind of arranging my feather salad, and I think at this point I sewed the first few feathers on and then realized how long that was going to take to keep the stitches invisible and just glued the rest on. And then I plugged the hot fix tool in once again to finish this off with some black rhinestones. I hope you enjoyed this little tour today of all the hats, headpieces, and masks that I put together for the recent Sanctus collection, and thank you so much for your support on that video. And as always, I'll be back with more sewing, vintage fashion, costuming, and crafting real soon, so I'll see you then. Bye!